And it is on this day, August 30th, 2023, that I finished The Way of Kings Part 1 and The Way of Kings Part 2. I don't know if I tricked any of y'all there. Actually, I still have the epilogue left, so I kind of lied. I technically read it, but I left my bookmark in so that I could like really take it in. So I'll reread that in a minute, but we finished the first book of Stormlight Archive. I was so stressed that I was like gonna get stuck again, that I wasn't gonna be able to finish it. But I read from, let's put these in order for you guys. I read from about right here all the way to the end in about 4 days. And that's 4 days with classes. So I was hauling. I was reading this on the bus. I was reading this every time between classes. I was reading at the start of class. I was reading this book because it was fantastic. I love this book. I think I'm going to need to reread it a lot to get a lot of the nuances. I think I feel for it like I felt for The Final Empire, where it's a great book and I love it. It's not as OP as like, Hero of Ages. It doesn't stand out that way to me, but it might be just because I just read it for the first time and I'm probably missing some pieces, which I'm sure I'll find in the next few books. But it really did grow on me. It just took a while to grow on me. So we'll talk more about that in non-spoilers, but I am very excited to have finished this. And in what's new and what's next, we'll talk about what I'm reading next. All right, with all of that said, let's hop into non-spoilers. I have notes today, so hopefully we'll pick up the pace. The prologue. The prologue is awesome. I love the prologue. I have reread it a few times because it is a badass prologue. Like, really. Or the prelude. The prelude to Stormlight Archive. I love it. I love it a lot. And then the actual prologue with Seth is also really, really, really cool, and I really appreciate it as well. And it's very meaningful too. So the prologue kind of gives you a taste of things, and you're trying to find those tastes as you go. And then once something sounds familiar, then your brain starts clicking. So I really like the start, that start of the book, but then I feel that it slows down after that for a bit. And this book, one of the things we'll talk about in a bit, not yet, but in a bit, is the ups and downs of this book. The book starts off with like 2 great ups, and then it hits 2 downs at the same point, and it's right after those downs that it feels pretty slow, because you're trying to like figure out what to expect, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, this book isn't as exciting as what the previous thing sounded like it was going to be. They kind of hyped you up for this one idea, and then the hype got like drained away with the down, and the down was fascinating in its own way, but you're like, man, the start of this book was such like a big hype thing, and then the down is like a not much hype for the magic system or the world building and stuff like that for a while. But then we get introduced to some other perspectives and stuff, and it goes back and forth between like being very interesting and being a little slow, and very interesting and being a little slow, until you hit that point where I was. Once I finished that one chapter that I was stuck on, I powered through the rest, because the rest was really interesting. Like, it started compounding on each other, a lot of things started happening, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But that's my take on the pacing of the book. I kind of regret the slow section, just a tiny bit, but that's not enough to really taint my opinion of the book now that I've read the majority of it in the last few days. It is a great book, period. Don't need to add more. All right. Next, the arcs of each character. So I'm actually going to say their names, but I'm not going to elaborate much about them. Kaladin has one of the largest character arcs I've ever read in a single book. Now, this is also one of the largest single books I've ever read. Keep that in mind. But Kaladin's arc is, I love it. I love it. I love everything about it. Kaladin's my favorite character so far in this book. I love him. I loved all his chapters with him. Some of them were very sad, and again, that slowed me down. But yeah, like Kaladin's plotline was always one I was excited to read, pretty much always. So the way he progresses, the way there's the ups and downs, which again we'll talk more about the ups and downs. Um, the way he narrates, I I'll just skip ahead and talk about the flashbacks. Flashbacks were one of those things that I didn't know how I felt about them at first. Like some of them were helpful and gave context to Kaladin and other characters, but also sometimes it was like I didn't gain much information from that one. I'm going to forget all that information before it matters. So I think there were maybe one or two flashbacks that could have been cut out, but a lot of the flashbacks really gave context to the character in a way that the actual scenes wouldn't have. And that's part of why Kaladin speaks so much, is because you know some of his backstory and his current story. The other characters, you don't get their backstory outside of them reflecting on themselves. So that's another thing that like really adds power to Kaladin, is you see a lot of who he is in this book. Next, we'll talk about Shallan. I'm sorry if I pronounced any of these names wrong. I haven't Googled how to pronounce them yet because I'm honestly scared to Google anything about the series. But I actually liked her plotline. Apparently, I've heard rumors that people don't like it, but I really like Shallan's plotline. I don't know if it's the idea of like being a scholar, or just some of the things she was doing, some of the unexpected events that happened with her, but I really liked her plot, and especially towards the end of this one, the first one. The reason I was turning the pages was for her, not for Kaladin. So I started really picking up this pace because I wanted to know what was going on with Shallan. So I love her plotline, and the way hers progresses is also very fascinating. I think the thing about all the characters in this book is that they are all very much distinct individuals. Like, they feel like real people. They are so much detail in like the way they consider the world, and the way they speak, and the way they behave. Just everything about them, their attitudes, how they carry themselves. They kind of feel like real people. There's just so much detail in the characters. So that's something I've really been reflecting on a lot recently, is like a lot of my favorite books all have characters where like there's just so much detail to them that they feel like they could be a real person, if the fantasy was taken away. So I feel that with most of these characters, and it's because they have so much complexity to them. It's very cool. All right, next up we have Dalinar. I'm only gonna do like the main four, in my opinion, the main four. But we have Dalinar. Don't know if I'm saying his name right either. He has the bit that was the slowest for me early on, as I was talking about earlier. However, I really liked him later on as well. And I really liked a lot of the world building that he brought. I think it was just, the politics just wasn't the best politics I've read. Like, he brought the politics plot into play, and it just wasn't the most interesting to me because I didn't really know the competitors. Like, even if you introduced Sadeas to me, who comes up a lot in this book, Sadeas just didn't seem that important to me. Like, he was, but my brain just didn't comprehend him as like a huge deal, even when he was. Didn't see it that way. And it was hard to just grasp how important the stuff Dalinar was going through was without getting more context, but also most of his chapters were just blocks of text describing the context. And so there's a balance there, because you want the context to be able to understand it, but you also don't want to read entire chapters of just context. You want to read stuff happening. So I think that's part of why, in my opinion, I found some of those earlier parts slow, is because it's describing a lot of camp life, it's describing a lot about the country and kingdom and how it like functions, and it's describing a lot about like these people need to talk with these people to politic with these people kind of things. And then there would be some fighting tossed in there as well, and some of the fighting was peak, very entertaining, But some of the fighting, and this has always been true with Sanderson, with me specifically, I can't follow it. It's part of it's because I have aphantasia, part of it's just because of the way it's described, but I usually can't follow most of Sanderson's fighting, especially not visually. I can't keep track of the details of where people are and what they're doing. So like I have little glimpses of some of the fights, especially some of the more important ones. I definitely have glimpses of that. All of Kaladin's, I can follow those. But when it comes to Dalinar's fights, because he's very powerful, if you read the book, you'll see why. It's hard for me to grasp. So those are some of my complaints about Dalinar, but I love him. I really grew attached to him in the second part, and I am very much intrigued about what comes next. And you should have seen me like reading in class. I like slammed my book. I slammed my book on my desk in like anger when I found out something about him. So I'm very much attached to all three of the characters I just listed. And for the fourth one, we have the character from the prologue, Seth. Seth has really grown on me in a weird way. I loved him in the prologue. Like, I loved him. And then we find out more about him as the book progresses. And I still love him, but I love him for a different way, in different reasons, and I'm concerned for him. And so now, because I got that love very early on, it's hard to get rid of it, even though he's going through some rough stuff. So there's definitely an interesting balance of emotions I have every time he's on screen. And I'm sure that's going to be a big deal in Words of Radiance. I very much suspect that's a big deal in Words of Radiance. In fact, I think I see him on the cover over there. So, I have theories. Speaking of, who's on the cover of these? This is probably Dalinar, if I had to guess. I don't know who this is. I was going to say Adolin, but Adolin would not hold that. I don't know who that is. But yeah, so those are the four characters. I specifically wanted to point out their arcs. Dalinar's arc is interesting because he's kind of the same person, just going through new things and like doubting himself, but then reestablishing like he agrees with the person he is. But there's definitely there's an arc in there. It's just the kind of arc where it goes in a circle rather than like he's like completely changing as a person, if that makes any sense. So I really liked his as well. All right. Now, as per usual, if you know anything about Sanderson books, he tends to have these puzzles / hints. I like to refer to them as puzzles because they kind of are puzzles in a way. That are at the start of every chapter. So you can see this top bit. This is always like a quote or some weird puzzly thing. I don't want to give away what it is, but there's always these things at the start of every chapter. And for the first half of the book, you have no idea what they mean. Usually you just breeze by them. They're kind of like a reread kind of thing. For Mistborn, I had to reread all of them for them to mean anything to me for the most part. But even when you're reading it, there are some very subtle hints in them sometimes. And again, as per usual for Sando, he had a twist at the very end of the book that made a lot of them make sense. And a lot of them have a lot more meaning. So now, again, I'm already excited to reread this and see a lot of the nuance and what those are, and figure out some of those puzzles. I'm not going to be able to figure out all of them, but figure out some of what's going on there. And just to continue about the Sando twists, there were a lot of Sando twists. I was not anticipating a lot of them. Again, that's part of why I really picked up the pace at the end here. Like, this onward, I was hauling because the twists were coming, and I was very much enjoying a lot of the twists. But this time, unlike Mistborn, he leaves some unresolved twist at the end of the book, so now I feel very pressured to read the next book. Curse you, Sanderson. Curse you. In a good way. Let's see, we already talked about that. Hope and pessimism, this is part of the up and down kind of idea. there's a lot of giving the reader hope. There's a lot of like using dramatic irony to get the reader to know something or like wish for something, and there's a lot of alluding to things to make the reader make the wrong assumption or make the wrong guesses to what will happen. And so, and even the characters get a lot of hope in certain scenes. And Sanderson was really good at either playing that hope at the right time or taking away that hope at the right time. And there were some parts of this book where the trade-off was fantastic. Like, he would take away all your hope and you'd feel down for the characters, but then sometimes he would give you just a little bit back afterward, or he would just take even more hope away. It was great. The ups and downs of this book were great. Sometimes, again, it was so sad that it slowed me down a little bit towards the beginning because you know less about the characters and what's going on. But once the characters start again to really establish themselves, a lot of those are really good. And I feel the more I reread this, the more I'll be able to appreciate that balance in this book. Great quotes. I've been quoting this book even before I read it, and now that I've read it, I'm still going to quote it. So some of the stuff he did with quotes is very cheeky. I now know why the book is called The Way of Kings. Very cheeky on his part, if you ask me. And I'm excited to return to this after I've read the other books and again take a measure of how important these quotes are. But no, some of the ideas in this book are really fascinating, and I really like how some of the characters are reflecting about different things, how different characters are seeing different societies differently is very interesting to me. Some of the interludes like give us like a little glint into what it's like in the life of another race or another kingdom or another like way of living. And even those little snippets are really great for the world building and very much are intriguing. So I really like those. Following that up, huge world building. This is one of those books where I get concerned that it's too much world building. Again, a lot of the slower parts were very heavy on world building because there's just so much to explain to you. One of the things that I will shout out is that the UK editions, which are the editions I'm holding here, give visuals in them, which of course I can't find one that I want. That's kind of spoilery. Come on, give me a visual. Okay, the second book's better. Here, let me just get y'all a visual. But they'll give visuals to help you like start to get an idea for some stuff. That's not a good one. Oh, come on. This can't be that hard. This should be one. Yeah. So here's some like wildlife in this world. So they give you some pictures to like be able to see and imagine certain things. No, it's not like I lost my page. I know where it was. So like some of that gave insight and some of that was like more intriguing. I think the problem with having so much world building in books like this is that you lose so much of that information so fast. Like even all the stuff I've read in the last 4 days, I feel I lost so much of that world building just trying to take in all the plot, all the character development, all the fights and magic and the details about the important stuff that I forget about a lot of like the background stuff they told me. And because I have aphantasia, I'm bad at building those images, and so like the initial descriptions of these places and like the ways of lives of people and all those things are really cool, but I just lose so much of it so fast. So there's a balance. That's my opinion. But if I were to guess, I think Sanderson's probably someone who's like very visual, the opposite of me. And I know there are readers that are very visual, so this is probably fantastic for them and just not meant for me. All right. And then, yeah, when stuff hits, it hits. It hits hard. So I very much approve. All right, that's all I had for non-spoilers. Barely made it in under 20 minutes. And then for spoilers, I just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 specific peak scenes I want to point out. Now, these are going to be the very obvious 10 scenes I'm going to talk about. There's a few others I could, but all the ones I'm about to bring up are very obvious to anyone who's read the book. I'm sorry to not be able to talk about much in the way of nuance, but I have a lot of these on my mind at the moment. So maybe in the 1 year review, after I finish Rhythm of War, if I do, hopefully I do, then we can talk about more of the nuances. But for now, we're going to transition to spoilers, and I can talk about these 10 scenes that I love. Alright, starting off, I think these are in chronological order, but I think some of them are not. Some of them are in order of the people, actually, because it's Cal, Shallan, Seth, Dalinar. So it's actually not in order. But I think the first thing is when Kaladin first starts training around the yard and everyone looks at him like he's crazy. That moment where he's like, I'm not gonna let them kill me, and I'm not gonna just let these people die, and I'm gonna try to convince them to join my side. That was the first like big character development moment, and that was the first big moment where it was like, I like this. I like where this is going. I like that it's not that he's just being taken out of the bridge crews or out of the slavery, but he's actually like going to be living in it for the majority of the book. And it really gives a lot of perspective to him as a character, and gives a lot of perspective to the world as well, to show pretty much one of the lowest of the low points you can be in the world, and giving you a perspective from there, and then contrasting that with a perspective from someone as high as Dalinar, back to back. I think there's a very interesting balance in that regard. And then next, this is kind of a big jump, but this is one of the first scenes that like really got me picking up my pace, was when Cal picked up that spear in the chasm, and the rest of Bridge 4 were doubting him, and he was like, they were saying things like, I bet he's never picked up a spear, he claims he's killed the Light Eyes, blah, blah, blah. And then he has this moment where he just breathes in, and he just does a kata, or a kata, don't know what it's called, but he does this like training routine that's like supposed to get like your movements and stuff down. It's not necessarily like something you would do to attack per se, because some of it's like moves over the shoulder and stuff like that, but it gets your movement and warm up and gets your feet together kind of thing. And he does it so smoothly and fascinatingly, and like Syl's like dancing around him. Syl's also a fascinating character. And afterward, like all of Bridge 4 is like jaw dropped and watching him, and like apparently they saw Syl just then, and so that was the first moment where you're like you already know Kaladin has a power to him. You don't know what kind of power, but you know he has, like, just from the beginning, people call him Stormblessed, and it doesn't mean much to us then, but like it's at this moment that we're like, Kaladin holds a power, and we know it, but we've really seen it come out here, and the bridge crew sees it too, and they join him afterward. There might be like one more scene to get the stragglers in, but most people joined him in that moment. And I still really love that moment. I keep reflecting back on it. And then less of a moment, but more a detail. Gradually along the way, as that kata and other things are happening, a lot of the bridge crew members become very likable. The main ones that we know their names. Some of them die, some of them don't. But like, Rock is one that stands out a lot to me. He's probably my favorite. He's entertaining. I like his personality. I like a lot of the world building he brings. Sigzil is another one that like brings a lot of world building. Teft. I really like the reveal where Kaladin pretty much proves that Teft used to be in the military. The way that Kaladin has to like work around like finding out whose backgrounds are what, and some of them like being chagrined after he finds out. That was actually weirdly very entertaining. It's one of those like small things that you wouldn't think would stand out to you, but it really does stand out to me. And again, I really like how they're a ragtag gang, and by the end of the story, like they are all following Kaladin to the end. Like they're saying, we're not leaving you. So they all really grew on me a lot. Then we start getting to way later in the book. So we have Kaladin charging the Parshendi with Parsendi, it's Parshman, right? So it would be Parsendi, Parshendi, the Parshendi. Okay. He's charging them, and he's using their armor and stuff, which we touch on the ethics of that, which is also fascinating that the ethics are included as part of it. I love that. But he's charging with the armor, and they get so angry at him that they're shooting at him. And in the next bridge run, he does that, but like especially, and the crew has to shift the bridge to the side carry so that they can block from one volley, but then the next volley is attacking them, and Kaladin is like, no, I won't let them die, and he draws like 100+ arrows all onto his shield, and some of it stabs into his wrist, and some of it doesn't, but like he draws like 100+ arrows all to one spot on his shield, and the entire shield's just covered in arrows, and everyone looks at him afterward. They're like, holy shit. That's one of those visuals where I can see it, and I love it. It's fantastic. So, great moment. And then after that, Kaladin, when Dalinar gets abandoned by Sadeas, and Kaladin's like, F it, we're going back and we're saving him. The way he is able to take the Stormlight from the Parshendi beards and just like really get some power and get going with the spear and just like slaughtering, like doing a one-man army pretty much, is intense. It's insane, and it's fantastic. And I was so excited for him to meet Dalinar. Like all of those chapters, I was like, oh my god, he's finally gonna meet him. He's finally gonna meet him. He's finally gonna meet him. And again, Sanderson was really good at using that. I have the hiccups. Why? Really good at using dramatic irony to make that meeting very, very meaningful. All right, next up, Shalyn. The first time that she is drawing the king, and she draws a figure in the doorway behind the king, that freaked me out in a good way. Like I really liked that a lot. And then each progressive time that she like saw a figure when she was drawing, like when she was drawing Cosbol? I'm really bad with names, but like Cosbol or whatever his name was, very interesting, and I really liked it. And then there's the moment where she accidentally soul casts blood, and then she like pretends she was attempting suicide. All of that was very intense, and that was right at the end of part 1, which is why I was like, oh, I need to read part 2. So I was very much feeling it. And then right after that, Coswell tries to poison Jasna and Shalyn, and we don't know how it works at first, but later we found out that the bread itself was poisoned, and then the jam was supposed to be the cure. And then later, we find out that Jasna soul casted the jam and the bread, which is why she was fine. And we see that moment of Shalyn like putting all the pieces together and figuring it out, and realizing like, I have the power that you do, and we're gonna work on this together. And she actually agrees. Awesome. I was very, very happy to see the two of them working together again, because I didn't want Shalyn to leave. I really liked her interactions with Jasna a lot. So I was very happy to get that ending. But along the way, I was a little bit devastated. I was like, Shalyn completely failed her mission. I can't see how she's going to recover her mission, given how Jasna found the soulcaster she stole. The fake soulcaster she stole. And it's just fascinating to me to find that interaction. But now they're going to the plains. Wow, why am I forgetting what they're called? The Shattered Plains. So I'm very excited for that. All the characters are going to be in one spot. Most of the characters, not all of them. Well, no, most of them, because Seth is also... That's actually literally my next bullet point. Seth's murder rampage. The wrong person gets the control of Seth's Stone, and he's having to murder a lot of people. It turns out it's the king, and the king is killing people in the hospitals that were described earlier in the world building, and those are the lines that are at the start of some of these, because it says like something a character said blank seconds pre-death. Collected on Ishashan 1172, 18 seconds pre-death. Subject was a light-eyed spinster of the 8th dawn. But that's what that king's doing, and he's sending Seth to kill Dalinar. Now, what's fascinating is that the king sounds like he's detecting the same issue that Dalinar is working on. So I wonder what his motivation is for killing Dalinar. I wonder if maybe they want different goals, or if they don't know that they're working towards some similar thing. I think they're probably working towards different goals. But we'll see. I mean, it's really hard to predict things like that. But Seth is now after Dalinar, so all Shallan, Jasnah, Adolin, Kaladin, Dalinar, they're all going to be on the Shattered Plains. So, interesting stuff's coming. Interesting stuff is coming. Excited. And then my last bullet point for spoilers was that Dalinar is an absolute badass and I love him. Don't really need to elaborate more on that. But really it was, which one's part 2? Part 2. Really it was like, I'd say around here that Dalinar really grew on me. It took a while. Longer than most of the other characters, but like once he grew on me, he grew on me. So when I saw the scene where Seth is being sent after him, I was like, no, don't let him die. He just grew on me. So that's going to be very intense the next book as well. But I really do like him, and I really want to know more about him. So yeah. Overall, I love this book. Again, I wish I didn't get stuck at the one point. I could have finished this book long ago if I had made it past that, but I just didn't. So just some things for me to reflect on. But I am very glad to have started Stormlight Archive, and as we continue into what's new and what's next, you will see that I plan to continue Stormlight Archive. Thankfully, we have Words of Radiance Part 1, which is the next book. This one's in gold. I don't know why it's in gold. Intriguing. Then we have Words of Radiance Part 2. So this seems very, very significant to me. So, very excited to start this. And I think I will immediately. I think I'm going to read another book at the same time as this. I want to read The Thousand Names. So that would be this book, The Thousand Names, by, I think it's Django Wexler, but I don't know how to say that name. I always thought that you don't pronounce the D, but I might be wrong, and I don't want to guess. So, Wexler. I do want to read this. I plan to read just the first book and pause after the first book. I don't know if I'm ready to commit to the series, but I've heard a lot of things about this book, and it's also very military fantasy. I think it's a bad idea to do military fantasy on top of military fantasy, but also military fantasy is fantastic, and this is smaller. It's less like details, and it's more like big scale fighting stuff. So I'm very, very intrigued about it. And when I opened it on Goodreads the other day, I saw that it had the LGBT category on it, which is intriguing because my friend did not tell me that. So I'm a little curious as well. So I actually have the audiobook as well as the physical for this, and that's part of why I'm reading it too, so that I can jump back and forth between the versions while I still can. So that is a lot of my current plan. I don't have much in the way of books here. I have all the books I had with me when I was in Albuquerque, which if you haven't noticed, I moved again. I'm back home, my home, thankfully. I'm glad to be back home. But I don't have much in the way of books. I just have Words of Radiance, A Thousand Names, Venus by Ben Bova, A Master of Jinn by Clark, Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham, Malice by John Glenn, which I did bring because if we really want to go on a military fantasy spree, I can also read Faithful and the Fallen. And I also brought The Professional by Robert B. Parker because it's a really, really, really small book. Really small. I bet that I could finish that in a day. Like, I can just sit down and read it. So I think that might be a good break book since I have so much fantasy here and not much in the way of sci-fi. I might sit down and just read that mystery book as a break. But I do have several sci-fi books on my Kindle, which I have with me. So we might need to toss in a sci-fi book soon. But I need to figure out what I'll read. And then I did put in another hold for Moon Over Soho. I meant to read it last week, but I got so engulfed in Way of Kings that I decided to just give my loan to someone else and return to Moon Over Soho whenever I next get my hold. So I think that would also be a quick read. So when I read that, you'll know pretty quickly. But yeah, so this has been Way of Kings. I am very glad to have been able to read this. And I shall continue with Words of Radiance Part 1. Don't know which book you'll see me with next. It might be Moon Over Soho, it might be The Thousand Names, it might be Words of Radiance by All, it might be a different book, but I'll hopefully see you all soon. Keep in mind though, the school semester has begun, so there will be a little bit of juggling. If it's not before October, you can join me on Twitch. I believe my Twitch is linked on the channel, so you can join me on Twitch, and I'll be streaming some horror games in October, even though I hate horror. So there will be a lot of screaming. So if you want to watch me screech, that will be happening in October. Alright, with all that said, I'll see you all next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.